Hey folks, Joe Valley here. Thanks for joining me on another episode of the Quiet Light Podcast. This is part 2 of my interview with Brandon White, a serial entrepreneur who had early investors in his online fishing newsletter from Sequoia Capital and others, raising $1 million in capital back in the mid-90s, having to buy it back when the bubble crashed. Never giving up, getting a job, paying somebody to run the newsletter from the job that he had full time, ended up having 5 people. They were profitable within 4 months, eventually sold the business, I think 10 to 15 years later. And this episode that you're going to listen to is just more of his journey. He has a master's in psychology. He's got an MBA and a lifetime of business experience. And it's just a really cool guy to listen to. One of the reasons why he's been successful over his years is because people have given him their time when he felt as though he wasn't qualified to earn their time or deserve their time, but people did it anyway. And that's more of what he's doing in this podcast. Again, in this one, he talks more than I do. We talk a little bit more in this one. I went on a little bit of a tangent on venture cap money and if you should accept it or not, if it's right for you or not, because Brendan's worked for 2 different venture capital firms in his life and his career. But this is, again, a great interview with a guy that has been at levels that many people never get to and connected with many people that we all hear about in the news. So let's go to part 2 of the interview with Brandon White. Here we go. Mark has 8 children and 1 on the way, Brandon. He's not necessarily cut out for it either. He wants to spend time with his family. That's what I meant. Not everybody's cut out just to take the VC money and ride that ship because you've got another spouse that you have to, or partner that you have to answer to.
Yeah. And I think it's a combination of, is your business a fit for VC and are you? And it is, I've done it. I've been on both sides of the table. I've gotten venture funding from top firms for subsequent companies. And it's a grind. There's no real balance. I mean, balance is a joke in my opinion. I mean, I just don't understand how greatness, there's nobody who I have met who I think we would all agree is exceptionally great, who has balance. There's people who do really well and better, but it's not 33 mind body business type thing. It's I'm watching the NBA finals and I don't know when this will come out. So maybe there'll already be an outcome, but Steph Curry didn't become the greatest shooter in the NBA by having balance. Does he love his family? Does he seem to keep a good engagement? Sure. But you can't play 84 regular season games and then play into the playoffs into what is effectively the playoffs end in June and then go back to work in 6 or 8 weeks and have balance. I mean,
yeah, and I agree. And the problem in today's world, and we're going on such a tangent, but it's so critically important, is that Steph Curry appears to have balance because of a great social media team. I watched the game 5 last night. Steph, he went to college half a mile from where I live. My son's going there in August at Davidson College. So even though I'm from Maine and should be rooting for the Celtics, I don't know any of the Celtics players at this point in my life, but I'm a fan of Steph Curry, so I'm rooting for the Warriors. So on my feed this morning, I'm seeing, him doing some lovey thing with his wife. It's social media. He has no balance. Can't be. You think about, she's raising those kids for the most part, most of the time, all by herself. So I totally agree with you. There's no balance. And that's, you have to pick, do you want to have balance in your life or do you want to be, steering the rocket ship of $1 billion company? Because that's what the VCs are looking for. I think it's one or the other. Do you have a different view?
I'm not saying it can't be done, and someone will write into your show, and I'm sure probably there's somebody 5 standard deviations from the norm. But if we're talking a normal distribution curve, it is extremely hard to be that good and that great and not give up an enormous amount of other things. So I think that my main reason for talking about this is that it sets expectations, and then people become disappointed when they don't attain it, and they think the other people are attaining it, and then they feel like a failure. Now that's sort of ironic for business owners or entrepreneurs, because in general, you're a type A driven person who's not actually worried what other people think. But there's always this part in the human psyche that wants to be liked, even a little bit, from people. So you see it out there. And like you said, in social media, it's hard to exist. And then life is a lot of disappointment, and whatever is really about expectation. So there's this expectation, then you feel like you're not meeting it. It's sort of like a lot of these people, Joe, talk about these companies, and they take pictures in jets, and they've got all these fancy cars. Yeah. And, I always want to know the story behind the story, because I led a life in the beginning as an entrepreneur when I started that really looked to these things and actually believed it. It's like watching WWF wrestling and believing it's real. And then you realize that when you get older, you're like, no, it's not real at all. So you get disappointed. So I try to say, hey, look, my life isn't, do I have balance? I love my wife. I love hanging out with her. I make time. Is it balanced if we went up to the whiteboard here and did the pie chart? No, but is that what it took to get to sell a company, to make a bunch of money, to get a house in Half Moon Bay on the ocean and do it? And did we agree that it worked? Yeah, we agreed. And we had a relationship that I believe that relationships are something in addition to your already existing life. And if you don't have that fundamentally on a foundation, your relationship's going to be really tough, because you fall into codependency and these reliability type things. And in our relationship, it worked, and we both agreed, and there's a level of trust there. But has it been equal, or balanced? No.
That's life, marriage with kids, business, entrepreneurship. I feel you. Same thing. My wife would say no as well. What are you doing now? You're, and I really want to hear mostly about the newsletter, because a lot of folks first think the newsletters are dead. How do you start a new business in that space in today's environment when everything is so competitive? It's not 1994 when you're launching a business online, right? A fishing magazine online. The world is so different now. It's so much more competitive. Most people just go to, I'm going to sell stuff on Amazon, but you're not doing that necessarily. You're doing a small to medium business newsletter, giving folks advice, I think. Why don't you talk about that before we...
Yeah, so not only is it a newsletter, but it's print, which may sound old school, but very similar to... It's in line with what we just were talking about, and similar to the fishing story is, I don't know about you, but I grew up reading Entrepreneur Magazine, Inc. Magazine, Fortune, these, and I just crave it. I still read these magazines, because I think that business owners, they want to get ideas. They want to know what their colleagues are doing. They want to get some new insights and at some level quash any doubt that you may have. I think being an entrepreneur or a business owner is you have to do things, you have to do things that you believe you can do that you don't think you can do. And you have to hold that thought simultaneously in your head. And if you don't understand that, then you're probably going to learn it. But the newsletter came about because I wanted a newsletter. And this guy, Mark McCormick, used to write one called something Success, that was pulled the curtain back and said, here's what's really happening. Here's how much money I make. Here's where I actually, what I realized is a lot of my friends make a lot of money, but they don't know how to invest it. And then they go to some money manager who screws it up. And you can be a self-directed investor. And I've been lucky enough to have some mentorship on that. But what's really happening in ad campaigns that you're running? you hear all this buzz and you get some ad on Instagram that says, hey, we're going to teach you how to do your ads better. And you feel like shit because your ads, excuse me if you have to beep that out, but because your ads aren't performing well because your customer acquisition cost is $17 and this guy's getting or a woman's getting it for $2. And you're like, so I just wanted a newsletter that I could get as a fellow business owner or aspiring one, because like Inc., there's people who aspire to be one and are, and would just talk about these real things. So I started writing it, Joe, and I every month I tell exactly what stocks I've invested in, why, what the premise is, how you can set that up. Psychology things, like everyone's like, oh, should you sell in a down market? No, you should not sell in a down market. You're an idiot to do that if you have a long-term strategy. What we do in Facebook ads, which we run, what is happening in our email campaigns, what we're seeing in those email campaigns, the A/B results, like real information, not marketing information. I'm not trying to sell you anything, just
right.
Like solid information. And then some stuff I spent a lot of time on psychology of my mind and my body and have learned a lot of things. So if I can share that. So I started writing a print newsletter, and I did it in print because I didn't want it to be on the internet.
There's no subscribers online at all. It's 100% print. So how did you find the audience?
Well, I learned early on about this thing called an email list. This is a very novel idea. Very, very, very novel. But I kept that email list for people who were interested in Brandon all along all the brands that I've had.
Mm-hmm.
And I emailed them all. And then I did this crazy thing. I actually started podcasting in 1997. It wasn't called podcasting. It was called Brandon got tired of writing 4,000 word fishing reports and put an audio file on the internet, which seemed a lot easier, which it did. And I just started a podcast. And your question about, are there newsletters? There's a lot. Are there podcasts? There's definitely a lot. Yeah. But here's my competitive advantage. My competitive advantage is that I'm not going to stop. And if you go back and look at podcasts and you look at newsletters that started and you see this with Quiet Light businesses, you've probably seen businesses that got off to a great start, a lot of momentum wanes, behavior stops. That's simple psychology. Go off to B.F. Skinner on this. Actually, B.J. Fogg, I'll give him credit because I studied with him, who's a professor at Stanford in the Persuasive Computing Lab. But it's really simple stuff. So they quit. And what I learned from starting a company, bootstrapping it, raising money, having to close it down, buying it back, was this: last man standing wins. Just like investing, if you are reacting to the down market right now, you will lose money. Fidelity did a study. Their highest performing mutual fund over, I think Peter Lynch managed it. Don't quote me. If anybody's interested, you can email me and I'll give it to you. But they did a study and he was the highest performing money manager. The fund outperformed the market out of 20 years, 30 years. It only missed 4 times. But guess what, Joe? Most of the investors in that fund actually lost money. You know why they lost money? Because they took the money out and they tried to time the market, and you can't time the market. In business, you can't time the market. So I believe that I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to stop. To be honest, right now, I feel like we're not growing as fast as we want. We have a small base of subscribers, under 100, but near 100. And I give it to friends and family. And I just know I could dump a lot of money into marketing, which we do try to market. But here's what I know. If I just stay the course, steady Eddie, over 5 years, 4 years, I'm going to make it. And I'm going to make it because I'm going to listen to the market and I'm going to adapt. Just like you probably did with Quiet Light and your show is you listen to what listeners want and then you tailor it. It's not rocket science, but you got to listen. Most people don't listen. So my competitive advantage is that I work hard and I'm not going to stop, and I'll be the last man standing. And I'm also different. Like who does a print newsletter?
Not a lot. I get one from Rise 25, the people who produce our podcast. That's it. And their main motivation is to connect and be in touch and be different be in touch in a different way than most people are. And I think it's awesome. So what's the name of the newsletter for listening audience?
It's just Edge. Yeah, the Edge newsletter. It's I don't know if that domain name is, but it is actually functioning. But if you go to our podcast, which is myedgepodcast.com, we have the information there. So
myedgepodcast.com.
myedgepodcast.com.
I'm going to subscribe if you don't mind. How do you make money on the newsletter, or do you not yet?
We charge a subscription. So depending on what you get, so I bundle it with a course that I taught called it's becoming another thing, but how to build a business plan and pitch deck in 13 slides. Took me decades to figure this out. But after I wrote a 55-page business plan, but I've taught this course to about 1,500 students. So I bundle that, and I do a Q&A once a month, and we sell it for, depending on what bundle you want, $9.97 or $19.97. I teach the course live, and we charge more for it because it's actually a college course, and it's getting certified so that you could actually get credit for it.
Oh, no, good.
Or get reimbursed for it. So we make money on subscription, and that's the model. And subscription businesses take a minute to get going.
A minute as in 5 years.
Well, we have a podcast, and that, is hard and it's noisy, but I was looking through, I don't know if you I go through my library, and a lot of the podcasts that I used to subscribe to, I was looking back and I was like, wow, their last episode was in 2020. Their last episode was in 2019. Their last episode was in early 2001. And what happens is people quit. And because, as you know, building a listener base is really hard in the noise. But here's another analogy. I know you probably want to wrap up. I don't know how long your shows are, but a friend recommended the series on either Apple, or it's Apple, I think, where they go through and they create scenarios of what if something happened. So the first episode was about what if Russia got to the moon first? Would we already be on Mars? I forget what the series is. That series is in season 3, and I just heard about it. And I'm going back to watch it. So it takes a really long time for this pump to prime itself, sort of like the message board that we were talking about when I was talking to myself.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, I was talking to myself when I started the podcast, probably because
nobody was listening.
No, I sent it out to this email list that I've had, but nobody would, it's just one of those things. And then, so you just got to be there and be there and be there. And there's a reason why these shows catch on after season 2 and season 3. And it's because the early adopters, so to speak, use word of mouth to tell other people. And that just takes a minute. But, there's plenty of examples with this. And quite candidly, there's a million examples of companies. Facebook didn't happen overnight. I remember I used to get emails, not from Mark, but from his early partner who had left. But like in 2004, I think they put UNC on there, and I signed up. But how long did Facebook exist? America Online sat in a dirty old office for 10 years doing this thing called dial-up behind the used car, the car lot in Northern Virginia. Dell didn't happen overnight. Sure, there's some stories that just shot off to the moon, but there's plenty of stories that it took years for things to happen. So my superpower is I am stubborn and I won't quit. Now, I'm not saying that's a whole nother podcast. Like sometimes you should quit because the business sucks. And you really got to be honest with yourself about that. But for the most part, if you solve a problem and you get some early people who say, yeah, I love it. Like the people who get my newsletter, they say, I love it, Brandon. I can read it when I'm in the bathroom, for not going into graphic. When I'm eating breakfast, it's sitting there. It's proven science that reading something on paper is different than reading digitally. Not to plug the newsletter, but if you solve these problems, it's going to take a minute. And if you read the story that says that the guy got rich or the woman got rich in 3 months because they flipped some e-commerce company or something, like, you should just be really wary and not.
They'll be broke in 3 months after they got the money. Simple as that.
I mean, just put it out of your head. Like,
yeah.
So it's long. I'm a long-term investor. I'm a long-term believer. So
it's good stuff. We are longer than most podcasts I've done. And this is the one where I think I've done the least amount of talking in a very long time, just because you've got a calmness to you, a tone to you, and it's a great story. There's no hype. It's just the reality of your journey. Lots of different things in here. I want people to be able to connect with you and learn more about your journey in other ways, the newsletter, things of that nature. How can they reach out to you? How can they learn more about you and what you're doing today and what you're going to be doing in the future?
The best way, I'll give 2 options. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, which is Brandon C. Well, I'll give you 3. Brandon C. White. I'm always happy to talk. My email address is b@brandoncwhite.com. And if you go to myedgepodcast.com, you can reach out to me there. You can see it's really the gateway into me. But that's my real email address, and my personal, it is because you and I communicated on it. Yep. You can reach out to me, and I'm happy to talk to anyone and give more information or anything I could do. I said this to you earlier before we jumped on. A lot of people helped me in my career that did not need to help me. And that's the God's honest truth. And if I can help someone just make a little difference, then I'm happy to do that.
Well, that's awesome. I appreciate you sharing over an hour of your day with me and the audience. Appreciate it. I look forward to next time in the Bay Area that hopefully I'm going to get to go fishing with you. See those big waves and stay out of the water because of great white sharks. All that good stuff. So thank you once again for joining me, Brandon, and thanks for coming on the Quiet Life podcast.
Thanks so much. Really had a great time.